There are a few things wrong with the Netflix series Adolescence. I've covered a few salient points in other videos, but we'll revisit the topic once again as it's becoming apparent that this TV show is being used as a weapon to crush white teenage boys, and it's not as smart as it wants you to believe. Now, if you haven't seen it, maybe you want to, there'll be a few spoilers. Co-written by the actor Stephen Graham and Jack Thorne, who co-wrote This Is England, which Graham was in. Amongst other things, it comes across as a slick commentary on incel culture and toxic masculinity, but it's so far wide of the mark. Graham is in his early 50s, Thorne in his late 40s, and it's no wonder they don't really grasp the subject matter as well as they think they do. And I wonder who did the research and where for the show. Stephen Graham is on record as saying he got the idea partially from killings of young girls by boys, and quoted the killing of Brianna Gray, who was in fact actually a boy, not a girl, as is claimed by the media, biology and all that. And in that case, the motivation was mostly because of the trans identity, more than anything. So, not incel culture. You could argue toxic masculinity, but I'd argue just general deviant behaviour. You only take someone's life in a pre-planned way if there's something very wrong with your psyche. And that is on show by women and men, so it's not an extreme form of masculinity. Another inspiration was actually a black older teenager, Hassan Sitanu, who was 17 at the time he killed a 15-year-old girl. You also had Axel Cabana, who killed 3 girls. Again, he was not a 13-year-old white boy. The last 2 examples were firstly an immigrant, and secondly the son of immigrants. And not to say that white British boys have not killed girls. In fairness, there have been a spate of attacks, but on balance, it's hardly fair to just put this on white kids, especially from secure, comfortable backgrounds, as depicted in the show. The killer in which is shown to be from a loving family with a mother and father, which isn't usually the case at all if you look at a lot of these incidents. But that's what this show does. It seems to try to make the point that no matter what you do, you can't escape incel culture as a young boy. Whilst we're on the subject, I'll circle back around to what I said earlier. I don't think the writers know what they're talking about. This is kind of highlighted by a scene where adults are talking about incel culture, and a woman, of course, says, "Oh, you know that Andrew Tate rubbish." What now? There's a conflation between incel culture and toxic masculinity. They're not the same thing, both of which is hammered home to the audience as the reasons for the brutal attack, and which isn't really the reason at all. I'll get onto that in a bit. Incel, or involuntary celibate, is a label that has been fashionable for a while now and basically proposes that you are this if you can't get any, no matter what you try. The theory is that this is what has spurred some young men to find similar males and form bonds with them, mostly as a small online community or small groups online. Then they use their and each other's rage at the opposite sex to hate on them, be it online or in person. It's a strange modern phenomenon and is helped by the online world we inhabit nowadays, where anonymity can help to mask identity and fear of accountability is taken out of the situation. But this behaviour is supposed to spill over in real life, resulting in various heinous acts. Toxic masculinity is harder to define, and if you listen to feminists, it's most things men say and do. The majority of people think it's what Americans would term frat boy behaviour. Here it's sort of boorish, oafish, extremely sexist, narcissistic, etc., whatever you want to call it. But to an unacceptable level, not tolerable in modern society. Which is interesting considering we tolerate a lot of other nonsense, don't we? Now, Andrew Tate is held up as a prime example of this. Loud, aggressive behaviour, flashing the cash, driving fast cars, being arrogant, treating women poorly, all the hallmarks of toxic masculinity. But many traits are just not toxic, they're just simply people being people. Why don't women come in for the same criticism, for example? They can be equally obnoxious, rude, especially to guys, loud, opinionated. We all know women like this, but it's just a people thing. So if you're supposedly an incel, you're probably not loud, brash, arrogant. Having these characteristics would suggest that you would at the least have some or an overabundance of confidence. And if there's anything that incels would not have, apparently, it's confidence. It takes confidence to rizz, chat girls up as we used to call it. So whilst there might appear to be an overlap, there are clear points of divergence between the two things, and it seems a lot of people just don't seem to get this. Someone displaying hypermasculine traits probably isn't single, at home all the time, talking in online chat forums about how they're not getting any. And as a side note, whilst I'm not a supporter of Andrew Tate as such, the only thing I think is okay is his espousal of work ethic, for example. I gotta say, it's not okay to use someone's name like that in this way. They didn't have to do that. It's another deliberate attempt to cement him as everything wrong culturally with men. I just don't believe he's the sole arbiter of information, good or bad, on the internet. And whilst you can debate his pros and cons, fixating on him for this purpose is weird. One person is not to blame for the woes of a generation, no matter how much influence that people perceive him as having. Going back to the incel part, I've previously talked about how you can't call a 13-year-old boy as an incel. Few boys are having sex at that age, and whilst the urges are there and the new hormones are raging and they're all over the place, some of the conversations in the show are just weird, like asking him about his sex life. He's not supposed to have a sex life, he's 13. It's like the psychologist treats him more as an adult than the actual boy he is. At 13, he's nowhere near capable of understanding himself or his emotions. And it's shown that his victim calls him an incel, which is a terrible insult, especially coming from a 13-year-old girl. The understanding being that he'll always be one, which is ludicrous. And maybe it's in keeping with a twisted girl's mind, I suppose. I mean, kids are particularly cruel as they haven't developed the social niceties. But with 13-year-old incels, the evidence obviously runs to the contrary. Few boys get laid at that age. That changes with time. And the number of teens or young men that remain virgins into adulthood is absolutely minuscule. Ultimately, these insults and cyberbullying lead to her demise. And he was being charitable and noble at one point as he asked her out just to make her feel better, it seems, after she was the victim of having topless pics spread around. So it's not exactly a picture of toxic masculinity, right? So he kills her because he's cyberbullied by her after she rejects him. Yet people seem to have glossed over this part. Was it an extreme reaction? Of course. Most real-life incidents come after some kind of deep emotional or psychological damage, which could be inflicted possibly by the victim, or possibly by the perpetrator's own family. But this isn't excusing the behaviour at all, nor saying this is always the case, because perceived slights are just that in some instances. The show pins his motive on his toxic masculinity, which again is near impossible for a 13-year-old to have. They don't have the tools for it, as well as it being a ridiculous moniker really for a broad range of behaviours, much of which at that age you just wouldn't consider it to be. It seems like an extreme emotional reaction, which the show tries to base the underlying cause on his toxicity. The scene where he goes back and forth with the psychologist is meant to underline this, but really it just shows a slightly fragile ego, which all boys have of that age, with an irrational emotional overreaction, which again most would do, that leads to a violent physical confrontation, which is initiated by her actually pushing him. Now, why he's carrying the knife is another matter completely. And again, maybe this is something the show could have done better to tackle the root cause and go into a bit more. I mean, you normally carry a weapon out of fear of a person or persons, but it's not clear whether the show is saying he would have killed her anyway, which feels unlikely. And I think that is why they had to have something a bit more substantial to the storyline as regards to the actual confrontation. Obviously, it all feels a bit made up because that's exactly what it is. It's a work of fiction. But moving on to the age part, if the show had maybe like a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, last couple of years of school, rather than 13, I think I'd take it a bit more seriously. A slightly older teen with a bit more life experience in many departments, including success with or lack thereof with girls, might have been a bit more appropriate, given it would have been really highly unusual to come across this kind of crime committed by this type of boy from that background at that age. Like, why so young? Just to make a point? I think maybe to vilify boys who have only just kind of started in their first teenage year to grow into a young adult. If the message is to nip this in the bud, so to speak, then it's the wrong call, especially with such a fresh-faced youngster in the lad who plays the main boy, who's actually 15 and clearly looks 13. It's just doing boys a disservice. Another worrying part, and the reason why I've spoken so much about the show, are the political connotations. Now, Keir Starmer, Farmer Harmer, has repeatedly called this show a documentary. Is this show, as some people have said, some kind of government psyop? What is he talking about? Using a fictional story to propagate your own ideas in the hope of having this shown in every secondary school, and I really hope that doesn't happen, seems like some kind of anti-male propaganda. which is how the media have basically portrayed men now for the last 10 to 15 years as either bumbling idiots or murderous scumbags or monsters. And then people wonder why young boys and teens are so messed up. If you're told long enough, loud enough, that you are a bad person, at that age, you're just going to start believing it. And people should know this. Do they not know this? It just makes me wonder if this really is the agenda to just completely destroy the psyche of young boys, to make them more compliant. So they won't give anyone, including the establishment, any kind of trouble. As obviously compliance is what has been propagated the last 5 years. I mean, remember lockdowns and mask mandates? The One Victim Support Group has said that showing this kind of thing to impressionable youngsters would actually drive up interest of how to do certain things in the show. The revenge porn, for example. So it'd be a bad idea. I think this show was generally a bad idea. That could have been good had it done its homework, understood the topics a little bit better, and portrayed more sort of real life scenarios rather than taking a few buzzwords, lumping them together, and just seemingly creating rage bait for hand-wringing socialists. Adolescence was made to drive home that young white boys who spend too much time online and have urges that go unfulfilled will become incels and hurt people. Well, I've got news for you. The statistics do not back that up, as nearly all young boys of whatever age or creed are online. Most don't have those urges met, and 99.999% of them do not commit murders. Correlation is not causation. Something that's constantly misunderstood in the digital age, and it's funny how we're online so much with such a wealth of information at our fingertips, and apparently a lot of people learn absolutely nothing.